All right. Welcome, everybody. What's up, Joe?
Man, we're live. This is great. Look at
I'm so
this. You're
excited.
coming from Puerto Rico, right?
I'm in the sunny island of Puerto Rico today, and you're in my other favorite place on earth, the hills of Virginia.
Yeah,
Um, Going to
yeah.
talk about some things as honestly as we know how. How about it for our time right now, I think, and it's so clear to me now, as time passes through this very strange transition that we're in, there is one thing and one thing above all others that people are looking for. And so we're going to try to provide you what that is today. And I'm going to tease out a little bit and then sort of close the loop at the end of this talk. But the goal of this podcast is really going to be, Joe, you have a fabulous background in finance. You're one of the really better researchers probably around in our industry doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I've worked a lot to internationalize and helping other people internationalize, and I have a decent background in medicine and health and healing. And so we're gonna leave this podcast to be as wide ranging as we feel to. Those of you who are interested and you want to send us comments or you want to jump into the conversation, by all means, we'll read the comments and see where we can take it to make it even more valuable for you. But Joe, let's start off. You had a very interesting comment here. We can go anywhere with this, but one thing that you brought up recently, just before we hit the record button, was the degree to which the sort of the curtain is pulled back, the
Yeah.
propaganda at this stage, and the clear, obvious workings of a political machine is so evident for anybody to see. It's almost unapologetically now,
Yes.
hey, we don't actually care who the candidate is, and you shouldn't either. What you're voting for is our ability to sort of implement, the agenda that you want to see it implemented. And actually, I wouldn't even say that. I would say the agenda that nobody wants to see implemented. And yet we are stuck in this reality. Follow up with your comment here. I'm looking at it here on my screen, but I thought it was
Yeah, yeah.
very
It's so
appropriate
interesting.
place.
And
Yeah.
by the way, do we have a name for the podcast yet?
No, we'll come up with one
Okay.
as we go along.
This is the podcast
The
that shall
podcast with
not be
no name.
named.
Yeah, exactly.
Black label, like
There
real
you
black
go.
label. Just black.
The other black
Anyway,
label.
but yeah, what I thought was interesting. I've been keeping up with the political stuff, not because I'm as interested in politics, but more because I'm buried in macroeconomics and the investment world. And what happens in the political sphere, unfortunately, today impacts the economy, impacts our investments. And so I need to stay in front of this stuff and understand, or at least have as great of an understanding as I can, so I know how to position my own investments. And I run an investment membership called the Phoenician League too. And so I'm kind of tasked with providing a kind of holistic approach. And so, look, of course, as we know, Joe Biden. I mean, anybody who was looking could see that the guy was had signs of dementia right from the beginning, but it got worse and worse. So the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, they finally said, "All right, we got to get rid of this guy." And all of a sudden, you could see. So it was almost like factions were fighting within the DNC. If you're looking at it, because Kamala Harris was, put out there as, well, she's the vice president, so naturally she's the one to step up, right? Isn't that what the vice president does? What there was very clear factions within the DNC that did not want her to be the presidential nomination, and that's evidenced by two things. One, she did a call with major Democratic Party donors in July. This is last month, as we're of our recording. 300 heavy-duty donors. Their goal was to raise $50 million for the election campaign. Those donors, several of them were quoted as saying the call was ludicrous, it was amateur, it was ridiculous, it was rushed and just completely mismanaged. And I think they ended up raising about half of what they expected to raise, because a lot of the donors said, no, we don't want this person. And there was a story in the Global News, and that it basically pointed this out, and it ran a picture of Kamala Harris, and she was like, arms are out like this, and she had that weird cackle face, that she does. And the headline was, key donors want somebody other than Harris to be the presidential nominee. And shortly after that, the New York Times ran a piece questioning Kamala's qualifications. The AP News ran a piece, and it pointed out, hey, this person has a dreadful approval rating as vice president. Her staff is turned over countless times, and nobody seems to want to work with her. Should this really be the candidate? And then CNN ran a piece too saying something about when polled minority, I'm putting this in quotes here, minority voters didn't seem to resonate with her. And this is all in the mainstream news, questioning Kamala Harris. So obviously there was a faction that wanted to go in a different direction. But several weeks later, all that stopped. And all of a sudden, the New York Times, the AP News, CNN, Financial Times, all of them, you name it, they're running the same slogans. And that is Kamala's campaign is bringing joy back to the process. She is bringing energy. One guy,
woman.
yeah, bringing more energy than we've ever seen since Obama.
It was overnight.
It was overnight. And the same exact talking points too.
Yep.
And it was like you could see very clearly it turned. The entire machine fell in line. So
what really is the significance of that? To me, there's a level at which the invisible government has always been a little bit this way, obviously, right? Since the rise of mass society, and certainly in a nation of our size, right? Whether you went back 100 years, any large political entity, there is an element of, right, like you study in 10th grade history, right, Tammany Hall, and like the way that New York was sort of conquered by the various politicians who influenced that area of the country, and it's always been this way to some degree. But is it just that is it just the fact that everywhere you go there's everything from cell phone cameras to social media reporting? Is it just that it's more difficult to hide and spin because of the media environment we're now living in, or do you think it's more blatant because they're more desperate?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that is part of it. They're more desperate, and you look at it, you can see kind of clear power factions have aligned against each other. For the longest time, I was kind of that kind of monolithic deep state mindset, like, it's the George Carlin thing, right? Like it's one big team and you're not on it,
Yep.
And it's all of them working against us. But it's very clear that's too simplistic. There are nuances, and you can see all of a sudden, of course, we've had Donald Trump around since 2015, but in 2016 he was elected. It was clear he was in a way over his head. I wasn't even certain he was genuine. I do think he was genuine. He just was clueless and didn't have any idea how the machine operated. Well, all of a sudden, you've got people like Elon Musk endorsing Trump. Elon Musk, of course, he's always voted Democrat. He was a big, enthusiastic supporter of Obama. There's nothing conservative about the guy. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, has not directly, but indirectly endorsed Trump. And now Trump's saying, well, that he could be my U.S. Treasury Secretary.
Great.
You've got, and then, of course, there's other members of the technology community. Peter Thiel, who's kind of in the same camp as Elon Musk, and I think Mark Andreessen is another one. And they're kind of all in the same camp. And then you've got all of a sudden RFK Jr., who is, the name Kennedy is synonymous with Democratic elite, right? And he's endorsing Trump. So it's almost like you've got this alignment of strange bedfellows, if you will, that are rejecting kind of the orthodoxy that has been coming from and I don't want to term it in terms of right versus left or Democrat versus Republican, because I don't think that's what it is. I think it's sovereigntist, kind of America-centric, and kind of the European-style globalist faction that wants more of a centralized policy that goes out to everybody. You don't get to choose. In the European Union, the individual countries are beholden to the edicts that come out of Brussels. So it's very interesting. So,
well, you bring up a couple of trends, and this thing about a move away from sovereignty, that is new. That is, it's new in the sense that probably it's been in the works for a long time, but the uncovering of and just the bare naked sort of revealing of, hey, we're going to have a worldwide illness, and we're going to have a dominant sort of narrative, and it's going to be controlled by several very, very close-knit, closed-door kind of organizations, and all governments are going to have to obey what these transnational organizations say. That's been in the works for a long time, but it never surfaced. That never actually appeared in our lifetime, certainly not at the level that we've seen it in the 2020s. Right. And I know you have a very interesting point on the banking situation, the various factions that have sort of separated and that are at odds, right? J-Pal versus what's the dwarf woman's name? I can't think of her name right now.
Yeah, Janet Yellen.
There you go. Yes. Right. And so like the fracturing of what appeared to be a monolithic, just a faceless wall of bureaucracy, right? That none of us
just as little as 6 or 7 years ago, it appeared to be synonymous, in line, like
they were all were all in lockstep, and that's clearly not the case. And so, but you bring up another trend also, which is this sort of this bold-faced lying, right, at the official level. This is a tremendous turn of events. Obviously, the hitting of the switch inside the Democratic Party to just say, and the way they've ostracized RFK, who's the only sane person in politics. If you listen to the man speak, I don't know if you caught the interview that he was talking with Tucker, and he was saying, like, but this nature is how we experience God. This is also how the divine speaks to us, and we need to protect nature, not because you want to quantify it as carbon, which is sort of like Satan entering in there, right? He got biblical on it, and it was completely appropriate. He's absolutely correct. Like the idea that, like, okay, so now the way to save nature is to tax everybody with an extra carbon tax, because carbon, the most common element in the universe,
which is tree food, by the way.
Yeah, it's plant food, right? But somehow we're supposed to get rid of that, and as long as we can tax people for it, that's the solution to the. It's like if you've been in nature. That the environment is, in many ways, like it's in real trouble, like especially the oceans, right? Which I so love and spend time on. And you can see it. You can see it in various places, like what's happening to nature. And it's been happening, right, all throughout modern history, certainly. I mean, it's not a new theme that the environment obviously is endangered. It is a problem. But the idea that it's that you're going to have just bold, barefaced, right, bare naked propaganda about what we should do about this, and you must obey. And so, the DNC thing, endorsing Kamala Harris, who absolutely nobody has ever voted for or been behind.
Did not pick up a single delegate.
No delegate. Ever. She was out by Iowa, in her attempt to run for president. She was gone before the first primary. Like nobody anywhere wants this person in anywhere near the levers of power. And yet, right, you're not really voting for her. You're voting for the same invisible imbeciles, right, that we've dealt with for the last 3.5 years, because that's now what the machine has become. Like it's the machine, dummy. It's not. And I was going to say too, the other example of this was, Russia invades Ukraine. Not a word is said about what happened in 2014. No, I know otherwise reasonably intelligent Americans who sort of, right, they're like, yeah, but, Russia invaded. It's like, but do you know anything that happened before that at all?
They overthrew the Ukrainian democratically elected government, right, in 2014?
Yeah, like they toppled.
They being the Western powers, not Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Just the again, like the hypocrisy of it, and the hypocrisy of saying, okay, so they should be okay with us putting missiles on their border 5 minutes from their capital. But didn't we almost fight a war with these people in 1962 because they tried to do the same in Cuba? And like the hypocrisy of, well, if they tried to install their military on the border right with Texas across in Mexico, obviously we'd have a problem with that. So, right, you can
people in Texas would have a big problem with
that. You can understand where they're coming from, but it doesn't matter, right? And so to me, there is an interesting thing that's happening, which is the craziness of watching the institutions lie. They always lied. Like you have to be really naive. Can I stop
you right there? Hold that thought a minute, because before we lose it, or I lose my thought, we think back to you mentioned the 60s and the Cold War and all that. Who was a big proponent of diplomacy? JFK, John F. Kennedy, right? Big diplomat, and didn't he work out a deal that kind of de-escalated the Cold War? I'm thinking back here. but I believe that was the case. Am
The
I
red
wrong
phone.
about that?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah. And
there's
so
all kinds of.
then you look at what happens to RFK, and it's like the complete opposite is desire, right? You know. So anyway, so I didn't want to get too sidetracked. I think it's an interesting point. We can see, going back to then, there were certain elements already in place that, because what happened to JFK, somebody shot him, and I don't buy the fact that it was just one guy out on the street that was upset about something
with a magic bullet.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, who's the filmmaker? Oliver Stone has talked, I think, most eloquently that was the turning point in American history when it was clear that the people running things, and that the ideas that you get to vote and you have a say in how the country is run, like all of that disappeared on that morning or that day in November in Dallas. Because from that point forward, it was very clear, like, it does not matter what you want. Your vote and your say and what the government does or doesn't, is or isn't allowed to do, did not matter from that point forward. And again, right? And so the Warren Commission comes out with a report that he was shot from behind, even though the ballistics say otherwise. And Doomberg, if you follow this guy's stuff, he put out a great post, and he talks about this too, right? He's a smart fellow. That all the people at Parkland Hospital, where JFK's almost lifeless body was taken, and then obviously very, very soon he was dead. But while they were still trying to save his life or do whatever they could for him, they just took notes. Honestly, they didn't know they were supposed to be lying about what actually happened and what his head wound looked like and all the rest. All of that came out later. And so you want to know what happened in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, 63. All you got to do is go read what the medical people saw there, and then you come to realize, like, wait a second. And then the commission says, yeah, but he got shot, and then the bullet took a right, and then it took a left, and it hit Conley, and case closed, right? And then you fast forward to, the 9/11 commission, and again, right, the obstruction of any kind of truth and resolution. One of the great things that RFK Jr. said recently was, or somebody was saying about him, like, why shouldn't this guy get closure? Why can't we have closure on these very, very painful moments in U.S. history, and maybe, just maybe, inch the nation away from, like, trying to start big wars with great big scary countries like Russia, back towards something like, yeah, but nobody wants that. We're living at a time when the institutions are taking us in a place that I don't know a single person who's happy or excited about what's actually taking shape. And it doesn't seem to be any kind of plan or exit ramp or any way out of that. And so that's gonna bring us up to our solutions here. But thoughts on that, right? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my point. It's like there's been this move, this hidden power structure that's kind of gradually gained influence, and it's working against the direct interests of regular folks like us who just want, we don't care about what they do in Russia or China or anywhere. We just want to raise our families and live a nice, comfortable life and enjoy friends and community and whatever. Like, we don't care. But they try to turn it into like team sports where, you're supposed to have a favorite team. And of course, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And you must, cheer it on. But people see through that stuff now. It worked there for quite a while, for decades. But it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true. I think what we're watching and what we're seeing is there is, if this term turning, right, means anything, the turn that's taking place we've crossed the threshold where the institutions are actively seeking problems. They are actively seeking destruction. They're seeking the destruction of the currency, the destruction of the borders, the culture, right? The erasure of history, and the very dangerous kind of line that they're treading is that I suppose the idea is that they'll somehow be able to manage the chaos that they're unleashing, and the idea that pitting people against each other and sort of like, as somebody described it, shaking up an ant jar, right? And pissing everybody off with just ridiculous destructive idea after another. The promotion of an Yeah, an
The
entire
scene in the movie
Marxist.
V for Vendetta, right?
Uh-huh.
Where the dictator's underground in his bunker, but he's out there in that scene. He's like, I want everybody to remember why they need us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like create the chaos and then present yourself as the solution.
It just seems so obvious, you know, it just seems so obvious. And yet I was listening to something recently. I can't remember who was speaking, but the comment was, you know, millions and millions of people really still do run around and think, the discussion was around the media, and like the sort of refusal to even look and say, yeah, but I mean, the media is not really that biased. They're pretty accurate. Yeah, they might get some things wrong, but it's like you can't name one thing that they've gotten right in years. Really, one
Right.
thing that really matters, right? The reporting on obviously COVID was a fiasco, right, from start to finish. The Ukraine thing, we already said. What's happening in universities, what's happening to the price of food, what's happening, you know, to the money system, right? It just go down the list. And I challenge anybody, if you're watching this and you come up with something that they've reported accurately or been correct about health of the president, et cetera, anything that matters, you're being lied to. And it's almost like the dominant motif during our time is not just can you recognize that you're being propagandized, but can you recognize it enough, right? And sort of what do you do about it from that point? Like it's one thing to know that you're being lied to, but what do you do? And so we're not going to get off this podcast without talking about solutions. But I don't know, Joe. Are we beating a dead horse here?
You know, I don't know if we are or not, but I think that's a good summation of kind of the big picture and how it pertains to us as individuals, you know, because I think we do have, there are solutions. We are not powerless. And in fact, the fact, you know, they are desperate because I think they know we're not powerless, and they need compliance, and they need people who are kind of beholden to the systems that they want to roll out. So yeah, I think that's spot on, man.
Yeah. And I'm going to come back to that idea here, but you and I live in different parts of technically still the US and technically in the US right now here in Puerto Rico. But I deal with groups of people who are maybe for the first time in their lives coming to the conclusion that it might be smart to have a different track in mind in case you got to make a run for it. What would your second life look like? This is commonly referred to as a plan B, but I find a lot of confusion around the idea simply of a plan B. I mean, if you think about your life now, that's your plan A, right? Whatever you're doing, raising kids and paying off the mortgage and right, working your day job and collecting a check or whatever it is that you do is your life. And the idea that you're supposed to just throw all that aside and go live a plan B is not really what a plan B is supposed to be. I mean, the idea of having a backup plan for, especially when times get ugly, right? Which it does appear we're headed into. I mean, right now things are still pretty good, but all the markers are there from, you know, skyrocketing food prices. I just wrote a promo. I'm writing a piece now on foodflation, and the idea that's like, yeah, I mean, if food prices get too high and people can't eat, that's when all hell breaks loose. There's no getting away from it because that is the point at which people feel like I got nothing else to lose. Like we might as well riot. I can't feed my children. And so, you know, how close are we to that point? These are the kind of tipping points that if they happen, uh, it's not only hard times, like governments fall, right? Like real chaos is
I
unleashed
think
on
that
the
was
land.
the catalyst for the Arab Spring, right? When was that? 2014 or 2012?
Bouazizi, yeah.
Whenever that was, it was
2010.
like there's a threshold of food affordability, and I forget
That's
what the
right.
number was, but I think that's what that was about, largely,
That's
or that
exactly
was
what
the
it was about.
catalyst, anyway.
Yeah, four
the
countries
expression.
lost their governments and their leadership because a guy set himself on fire in Tunis, you know, arguing over or protesting over corruption and the price of food. Mubarak, I mean, he was a leader of Egypt for 30 plus years. Gaddafi, of course, lost his life. He was in there for 42 years, most of our lives, and so. These are serious thresholds that we're very, very close to crossing. And this, my reason for bringing it up is to lay out the argument, which is not really an argument, as I'm going to present it, between staying and going. that whatever your plan A is, your plan B should be a complement to that, right? You should be looking for ways to integrate various options that would allow you to live a better plan A, right? That's how I think of a plan B. And my friend Matt sent me something that he did that has really, I think he articulated it really well. The idea here is not, okay, so you should, put a for sale sign up, hit the bid, sell your stocks, and grab the kids and run for the border because that's somehow going to be better. There's nothing practical at all about that. And so my argument has been, and the reason I'm also bringing this up is because I think you're one of the best prepared in the camp that says, no, we're going to stay put. We're in a great part of the U.S. and we're going to ride out whatever's coming because this is the best place for us to ride it out. And so, in the camp that says stay, you got to have certain things in place, and mostly those are very easy to. It's not a difficult list to brainstorm. You should have some grub, right? That doesn't go bad. You should have some power source like solar, because, right, obviously if things really break down, you're not going to have that, and so you need to be self-sufficient in that way. You should have backup sort of power source because it is that important, especially if you live in a place that's cold part of the year. You're going to need it, right? How are you going to stay warm? And obviously, the other thing, and this is where I want to go in all of our podcasts, is probably the single biggest item that most people have never thought of or have not thought of recently in this context is people. You need the right people. Community. You need the right team. You need the right community. You need to be actively cultivating and nurturing the kind of relationships that will help you get through really, really ugly times. There's no doubt about it. Your community is the most important investment you can make, I think, for the rest of the 2020s and probably beyond. I mean, these transition periods take a lot longer than people think. Joe?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. By community, we don't mean just friends to hang out with, people who actually know how to do things. We all have our own unique skills and talents and knowledge. But, where I am up in the mountains, we've networked with the local agriculture community. So folks who are raising cattle, they're raising chickens, they're raising lamb, they're doing produce. There's an apple orchard. Some folks are making cider. Some folks are making wine, raising grapes up here. So they're doing all kinds of different things with bee makers, with honey. We can get milk, for our pets, of course. It'd be illegal for us to purchase milk directly from a farm for our own consumption, but we just we give it to the dog. So that's perfectly legal.
Good for you.
But these are folks who they still know how to produce food and a surplus of food in which they sell. And then there's other folks who know how to repair things, fix things. You can go right down the list as to what skill sets kind of are needed in a community, and we each have certain contributions that we can make. But at the end of the day, it's about
add them. I mean, it's funny here. So I had a phase of my life I was in medicine, but I learned really practical skills in medicine, and so everything from pain to stress and insomnia right on down really responds well to acupuncture, probably the single best therapy, right, in terms of broad application to common complaints and common medical problems. I know a thing or two about healing digestive illness with various tools, but I was going to say I'm adding to my skills too. And there's like VOTEC, vocational tech colleges right down the road from where we live here in Puerto Rico. So what do you want to do? A year in like diesel mechanic? What do you want to do? You want to do like emergency medical technician? You want to do like a handyman kind of sort of technical degree for a few months, something like this, where you could, storm comes through, you're going to have to do repairs on the house. Do you know how to do them? Right? Do you have good carpentry skills? This kind of stuff, and it's all right here. And so, it's not too late to add skills. I mean, I'm finding that I'm adding skills, and that if I didn't have to sleep, I'd add more. I'm on it, where I had a mechanic friend come by and show me, like, here's how you clean the plug on the generator in case it gets gummed up again. And just these kinds of things have now become very, very important in my own life. And you add skills, now is the time.
That's a great point. And I want to make the point too, that it's not necessarily because doomsday might come. It's not necessarily because civilization will collapse. Even if nothing at all goes wrong, if you have a community where everybody has different skills and you can hire each other, that's a self-insulated community. You kind of have a, strengthen your local economy where you get rid of the slippage that goes to middlemen and things like that if you have to hire a larger entity to come in and do these things. And it just creates kind of a simpler way of life that I think we lost. There was a book that I read a while back. It was written by a guy named Robert Nesbitt, and it's called The Quest for Community. And I think he wrote it in the 80s. I think it was the 80s, maybe the early 90s. But it was really interesting. And what struck out to me, he made the point that we've had incredible technological advancements over the last several decades, and technology is great. I mean, it's made our life so much easier. We have modern comforts and luxuries today that the wealthiest people alive just 100 years ago couldn't fathom.
Couldn't conceive of.
So it's great. But what we lost along the way is the idea of community and the idea of self-resilience and the idea that, it's kind of what Tolkien, just jumping books here, J.R.R. Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, what he was depicting with the Shire and the hobbits living there was that older way of life where you had a community and it was just a simple life and everybody knew each other and everybody had their different trades or whatever.
That's right.
And so I think the point, though, is that they're not mutually exclusive. You can live a life where you're immersed in high technology and enjoy modern luxury and conveniences while also benefiting from some of the old world wisdom.
Yeah.
But that's the big thing, though, and know how to do things.
Know how to slaughter a sheep and know how to, dress. Dress a wound.
Which I don't want to do any of that. But I want to know somebody who does, because I'm a softie. I don't want to hurt any animals. But if somebody else can do that and knows how, and I don't have to see it, okay. But that's the one point I want to make, though. When you think about, you're talking about Plan A versus Plan B. I know there's so many people who have, either whether it's doomsday preparations where they're like, all right, I've got this house in the mountains and I'm going to go there if things go bad or whatever, and maybe they've got some stuff stored. But nobody's going to accept them in that community, most likely, because people in small communities are very apprehensive of people that they don't know because there's a trust level. And so it's, if you're going to be, if that's and this is kind of going back to what we've done. And we said, all right, we're going to ride it out up here in the mountains. We've integrated into the community. We're not doomsday, guys up here with hoarding our food and guns and ammo and all that stuff. We're trying to participate in community.
Yeah, your security is the people around you to some degree, obviously. Right. Yeah, which is the best security you can have. But it is true that so trying to get to the turning point, when you would know that, okay, the end of this chaotic period is now in sight and things are definitely going to get better. They're not better yet, but they're coming. It's coming. I heard our mutual friend and mentor, Porter Stansberry, say this recently, and he was, obviously you and I are very aware, and I don't think everybody is, but it's worth making people aware of what happened in 1971 and the knock-on effects of disconnecting and having the currency just float freely against other fiat currencies without any real backing, where it's anchored to something real. People say Nixon took us off the gold standard. That's sort of true, but I mean, Johnson had already done it, right? Johnson had already taken
and FDR before that. It was kind of a gradual process.
Right. But the closing of the gold window was the final sort of death knell that sealed the fate of not just the U.S., but the entire world has been living in this weird. It's an unreal reality. And what I mean by that is when you disconnect the money from anything that's concrete, anything that's real, so a group of insiders, but don't worry, they're not going to be corrupted by this power. They can now create any amount of fake, essentially it's counterfeit wealth, right? If you and I did it, we go to jail for it. But these guys are allowed to create whatever amount of fake paper wealth, which isn't even paper, it's just in a computer somewhere, and then go buy real things and do real things and influence, policy and start wars and create ridiculous, idiotic. The idea that is possible has created an unreality in which there's no price, there's no punishment, there's no actual comeuppance for doing stupid things. And you see this at every level. Obviously the United States is probably the biggest example of this, but it's not like it's not true in other parts of the world too. It's just less true. That's uh, without getting too complicated here, that's also a function of the fact that we're the world's reserve currency for now. But that and I think if Kamala somehow manages to be in charge, I don't think that's going to be true for 4 more years. I think that will end with on her watch. But regardless, my point being, this unreality, and it permeates every aspect of society. It's from the teenage girl down the street with blue hair who now wants to be a boy, right, or thinks she's a man, right, even though right she's genetically female. There's no punishment. There's no actual blowback for making insanely stupid decisions. And I use that for an example, but I spent way more time than I want to admit also in higher education. I got a graduate degree in San Francisco, in a school, a quirky little institute in the Mission District of San Francisco. This is ground zero for these really bad ideas. I mean, I don't like using the term woke because I don't like using the term. I don't like speaking on my enemy's terms. But that is what it's referred to now. So you know what I'm talking about when I say that. But the clear problem of, okay, but if you have a stupid idea, you need to be disciplined by reality that that's a stupid idea. And if you lose your wealth because you thought the world should be some way that it's not, and that nobody else agrees with you, then your stupid idea would become something else that's less stupid. And this is how we advance. Like, you have to understand, like, money is actually a kind of epigenetic phenomenon now. Like, it actually has so much influence over what's happening in the world, and in a certain sense always did. But my point is, fake money now has a fake influence that my basic considered conclusion on what's happening and the effects of this monetary illusion that we're living through is that it will not survive, and that these bad ideas will not survive reality, or will not survive, as the military says, first contact with reality once this issue is finally resolved, and the whole monetary inflation and the whole sort of fake money printing thing finally comes to an end. You know way more about this than I do because you work in that field and studying sort of what's happening on Wall Street, and right, you have that background. But talk about that for a little bit. Like, what should people know? Expand on what I'm saying. Maybe you can actually even say it better.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of nuances there. I mean, your overall point that it's not the money corrupts everything. When the money goes bad, when you can create money out of nothing, and not you, not us, but your institutions in society, the government, the central banks, can create money out of nothing. All of a sudden, they can fund programs that are not economically sustainable. And the only way that those programs can be sustained is to print more money. Well, of course, the act of printing money injects new currency into the economy, which steals purchasing power from the currency that's already there. That's just basic supply and demand economics. And so that's what drives everybody's cost of living up. And that's the inflation that we're seeing.
It is a tax.
Yes.
I mean, it is a form of taxation. If your money's losing purchasing power at 10% a year, which I think is conservative right now, you're being taxed an extra 10% a year. I mean, this is something most people don't get. And I guess the question is, and I keep hearing this, I'm hearing this like in my own little world, I'm hearing this question come up, like, how much longer are people going to take it? Because it's going to get bad. Right now, it's not that bad. But if things really get out of control, like war, you're going to see money printing on a scale that, like, most people can't even imagine right now, because there is no other way out. Am I right?
And that gets to your point. A massive world war would not be possible without the ability to create money for nothing. This is why they they instituted a central bank in the U.S. in 1913, because they wanted to finance World War I and then World War II. And now we're looking at, they seem to want to do World War III. It's only possible with printing fake money. But that's true of so many other institutions, public institutions, that are just doing crazy, destructive things. And I can't think of any good examples off my head, but pick your favorite. But it's also true of public companies, too.
Yep.
There are lots of public companies that would not exist if it weren't for the creation of trillions of dollars out of nothing. And I think they've created, about $8 trillion from nothing that we can verify just since the, I think 2020.
2020.
I have to go back and look. At that. I think maybe 7 or 8 trillion just since 2020.
Yeah, I've heard 8 to 9. So yeah, I mean,
and that's what we can verify through direct channels. But that also drives interest rates down. We had interest rates that were basically zero for more than a decade. That allows what are called zombie companies that do not earn enough money by providing goods and services that people want to sustain themselves. What allows them to borrow more and more money because interest rates are next to nothing. And so these companies continue to perpetuate, and they do.
It financializes everything, doesn't it?
Financializes everything, and it sucks, capital away from what should be, what productive activities should be taking place. And not a single one of us knows. I don't mean to suggest that I know what activities should take place. I don't. None of us do. No, that's what honest money does. And honest interest rates signal where's the demand, where's the profitability. The profit's just a signal that there is demand here. This is needed in our society. So
we're
not to ramble too much, but
we're living we're living in a complete delusion, decade after decade, so that it's become normal.
And I think where the social aspect comes in, just to kind of tie the knot on this, you talk about the social aspect and the people that are confused, and all of a sudden we've got this, can boys be girls? And at one time they tried to tell us a couple of years ago men could have babies. I remember that. Of course, you hear that and it's absurd. But I remember a tweet
that was debunked.
I remember a tweet that Elon Musk put out right after when they first started floating that idea, men can have babies. Musk put up a tweet of a picture of Bill Gates and just a weird looking, abnormally shaped man. Like he looked like he was pregnant. And Musk's comment was, maybe they're onto something. I laughed at that. But the point though that I want to make is that we've driven the cost of housing up to the median price of a house in the U.S. is $430,000 today.
Yeah.
National average. It's going to vary based on where you are. You go back to 1980, it was $40,000 roughly. Price of a house. Median price of a new car today is now $40,000, maybe $45,000. Costs more than a house did in dollar terms just in 1980. And back then, a new car would cost a couple $1,000. And you look at that and you compare it to the wage growth, median wage growth in this country, and there's no comparison. Wages are largely flat. They're stagnant, whereas costs have skyrocketed. So it creates a dynamic where the comfortable middle-class lifestyle appears to be out of reach for a lot of people, especially younger people who were not able to participate in the big asset boom. Baby boomers who had their retirement funds and their brokerages and stocks, they've done fine because stocks have exploded along with the creation of money. That's how it works. But the younger generations have not been able to participate in that. And so they look out and they see, well, college, I'm going to be $200,000 in debt. A car costs $45,000. A house costs $430,000. I'm never going to be able to afford these things. And so what happened? It just distorts everything. And so they resort to these ideas. And I don't know they're influenced in this direction, but they're susceptible, I think, to it because they look around and they say, well, I'm not going to be a respectable person in this crazy world. It's respectable by the traditional terms, raise a family.
No, but it's an incendiary situation between generations. My folks own assets. A lot of older folks own assets. I'm old enough. I had money to buy assets. You own assets.
We've benefited from this, but
right.
Not to the extent that the insiders have, though. It's still big,
but we've benefited, and anybody owning assets will benefit until they don't. Yeah. And then what are paper assets worth? I mean,
that's the key. What assets are we talking about? There are assets that are going to protect you from monetary debasement.
But the financialization of everything makes it incumbent on everybody to, in some capacity, to actually have some accounting ability. Dalio said it really, really succinctly. The world has an accounting problem. And that is correct, because now that everything is financialized and there's so many things, it's like, well, on paper it's worth this, but is it really? Right? Probably not, right? And and the old saying, like, you find out who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. And so this thing that's coming, and every time that the economy and every time the market tries to reset itself to something that's a little closer to not just sanity, but like to a reality that makes sense, more money gets pumped in. And so God only knows what is in store for us. But this 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 theme of living in an unreal time, and a time where it's been so distorted for so long. Entire generations of people have grown up thinking like, "What are you talking about? It's normal." Matt, my buddy Matt, I was talking to earlier today. He introduced me to a term, so I'm going to use it here. This is my first time using this publicly. It's a great concept, globo homo.
Okay.
And it has nothing to do with sexual preference or anything else, but it's a concept by some French thinker years ago, and I can't remember. I have to look at the title of the book, describing the he was writing about it as it was appearing, probably more or less in concrete form for the first time. Consumer culture, the whole idea that people running around, you see this with ugly Americans, right? When you travel, you see it, not just Americans, but it's particularly noticeable when your countrymen are acting badly in some foreign country, where the whole expectation is like, but you work for me, I'm the customer, I'm always right, of course you should be serving me, and the world should be set up this way, so get into work early and work till 5 and do what I want you to do because I'm the customer and I'm always right. And if I have to be impolite about that fact, well, that's your fault, right? And so this idea, right, that the whole thing should be set up this way, and that the only way for it to continue this way is to continue to financialize it. I mean, Joe, are we going to see the end of this in our lifetime?
Yes, we are. The question is, what's the end look like? Because it's, Ludwig von Mises, the great Austrian economist, he described this dynamic very clearly. He said there is no means of reverting a credit boom where you're printing money out of nothing. You can't just go back to where you were. There's only two choices. You can continue down that path until it ends up in ultimate destruction of the currency and the monetary system, or you can choose to abandon that path. And you're going to have to allow a correction to occur. That means you're going to have a recession, probably a large one, depending on, the size of your recession is going to be proportionate to how much money you created and how distorted you made the economy, because all that's going to have to get worked out. Those zombie companies are going to have to go away.
They got to go.
Public-facing institutions that are not sustainable, they're going to have to go away. That's it has to happen if you want to get back. If you want to avoid, that's the medicine. If you want to avoid absolute collapse, you've got to stop, and then you have to sit back and allow those things that are not sustainable to, in fact, themselves collapse. And you can, work through it, muddle through it as best you can. Those are only two choices. And so for the political class, none of them want to say, well, no, let's let everything crash and burn, because then all their power goes away, and they're
really enjoying things as they are, and so you're up against the timeless, eternal dynamic of, look, this is the way we've always done it. By God, we're going to continue doing it this way, when a growing number of people are coming to the conclusion, I think, and it's very obvious depending on where you sit in the societal hierarchy, but it can't continue. It can't. It's not possible. You can't just, what are we going to do? Have wars with everybody over everything, right? And send troops everywhere and continue to live in a kind of phony, false kind of, well, we want reality to be this way, so therefore we're going to continue to pretend that it is this way. It's like the rest of the world is not having it. It's obviously a very dangerous time, right? The whole military misadventure thing is once again completely out of control, as if we never, the folks running that apparatus of the state learn nothing, right? From generation to generation, they learn nothing. Or what they learn is, okay, well, here's how we can make more money starting another war.
General Smedley Butler, right? Or was it
Smedley Butler?
Yeah. War is a racket. He was a big World War II general, very successful.
He was a muscle man for the government.
And he realized after the
fact. Only he didn't know it until the end of his career. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And he was like, hold on, this is about the military-industrial complex. This is about these giant corporations that are making a killing.
It's a mafia. So. Yeah, exactly. Well, in any case, maybe wrapping up here for today, these are the themes that I think matter for people to understand. I don't think you can make good decisions unless you're reasonably educated about these topics. I think touching on, what's happening to the monetary system, what's happening at the level of our institutions. I have more to say about this in our next episode because I heard something really cool. I'm going to read you a really cool quote. And this issue of, these, what do you do about it, right? Like, how do you get yourself and your family through the times to come? Because right now things are still good. Like, it's still reasonably good, right? In spite of all the trauma and the disruption in the 2020s, by and large, things still function. There's still food on the shelves where I live. It's good times. You don't need to, duck and cover if you go out to the grocery store, or you're not buying stuff with gold and silver coins yet because everything has collapsed and the ATMs are dark. But we really are living in a time.
Anybody would know what a gold and silver coin was anyway.
Most regular people.
I own gold and silver. I suggest doing so, but you think about it. Ask the average person. Just somebody you meet on the street. Do they know what gold and silver is? Like, would they accept it in exchange?
I forget. Somebody does something? A great YouTube channel where he does exactly that, or he did exactly that. He actually said, would you like this $20 bill or this gold coin? And like, no, or no, it was like a Hershey bar or a gold coin. Absolutely, 100% of the people took the candy bar, which is just insane. But it shows you, because, and Porter made this comment recently, that even a generation or two ago, maybe you got to go back 2 generations from our age. If you asked your grandparents, great grandparents, what money was, they would say it's a receipt. It's a paper receipt to redeem precious metals, because precious metals were understood to be money because nobody had control over them, or they grew at a very slow rate and the government didn't have any ability. You can't print gold coins, right? You have to actually go dig it out of the ground. So it represents labor and time, the time that it took to do that. And you have a paper receipt on redeeming that token of time and effort.
It said that on the note, on the Federal Reserve note prior to 1933. It said there is deposited in the U.S. Treasury X ounces of gold or X ounces of silver represented by this note. And you could turn that note in.
I may be wrong about this. Yeah, I believe in the Constitution, if I'm remembering correctly, a dollar is defined as a certain amount of silver.
371.25 grains of fine silver. And the reason for that is because the Spanish milled dollar was the largest circulating coin in the U.S. colonies. And so the founders said, well, we don't want to throw things out of whack in the economy. So we need to make our silver dollar the same as the Spanish dollar so they can circulate side by side.
That's it. I think I learned that from you, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah. It was always defined by precious metals.
Yeah, always. And with good reason. And the fact that, central banks are very price insensitive and that all countries are stockpiling gold is a pretty good sign that it's probably not a bad idea to have some for yourself. Look, to wrap up here, these topics, what to do about staying put, getting out of town, should you internationalize, how should you internationalize? I put together a half coaching, half mastermind group called the X-Plan Community. If you're interested, I put a link below this video. Check it out if you want to get smart on this stuff and sort of where to buy gold and where to store it and how to do that and how to do it safely. By all means, do that. Joe, I know you have your great investing group there too, that you teach people about how to. Well, go ahead and throw a quick plug in.
Yeah, with the investment membership, it's called the Phoenician League, and it's a comprehensive membership. It's on a subscription basis, and it's information and implementation. We talk about exactly how to create true financial security, given everything that's taking place in the economy today. And then we talk about, okay, once you've got your security, here's how you leapfrog to financial independence. And that's about creating extra income sources. And so that's the Phoenician League. It's a larger membership. I've also got a short course called Finance for Freedom, it doesn't require a subscription. It's really all about the education piece. So
it's excellent, guys. It's excellent. Link below, but all those links will be below the video here. Thanks very much. We'll wrap for today, and we'll be back with our next episode to talk about more cool stuff.
Back with the podcast that shall not be named next time. Stay tuned.
That's it. We'll stay with the No Name Podcast for now. Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Take care. Yep.